Hi friends, just a warning that this episode talks about deportation and detention and there are a couple of swears. Please take care while listening to this episode.
August 2019. It's a normal Thursday for Priya, Nadesalingams, and Tharnicaa, except their normal has become being held in a detention centre in Melbourne.
One night, the family are just eating dinner like they always do when
Suddenly all these people came. They took Priya in one direction, the kids in another, whilst my fingers were still covered in food. They asked me to wash my hands. I said, "What's going on?" They said, "You are going to return to your country."
the family had an appeal that was rejected by the High Court a few months earlier, which meant that all of Priya's legal avenues were exhausted. Tharnicaa is the only one who has any sort of legal avenues, but she's still subject to this bar which prevents any visa applications. All they can do is request that the minister lifts this bar so an application can be made for Tharnicaa.
Instead, the family are being deported. Again.
Yeah, my baby crying. Why? No, your baby's not crying. She's fine.
Two people grabbed my arms. They wouldn't let my kids come to me. They took Nades to a separate room. They dragged me and tried to force me into a vehicle. As I was dragged, my pants had slipped off. They wouldn't even let go of my hands to pull my pants up.
Priya video calls Vashni, a friend from Biloela who she had been in touch with pretty much every day.
Because I was screaming and Priya was crying and I was like, what's happening? They said, they suddenly came and they said they're going to take us to the airport and they're going to deport it. And I was watching everything because I needed to tell what's happening to Simone.
And so she dials in Simone, the legal friend who taught Nades English in Biloela.
So now they're both on a video call with Priya.
And I could see these people in the background and then all of a sudden the penny just dropped that they were going to remove the family. Yeah, I mean, it was absolute panic stations then.
We were telling Simone everything that was happening, where we were going, how I was in one vehicle and Priya was in another. We were taking videos as proof and sending it to Simone. She said to not worry, that she would speak to a lawyer and do whatever is necessary to get the stay order. Just be strong, she said. You will not return to your country. She promised, you will return to Biloela.
Vashni, Simone, and the team start to mobilize. You've got these photos and videos that Priya and Nades are sending that are being distributed to media and social media. And
we were on the flight trackers to work out which airport.
This is Angela, the main spokesperson of the campaign.
Particularly when anyone hears the word a deportation is live, people are just like, well, we don't have time to plan or to discuss. We need to just go.
And some of the people who turn up are trying to stop the plane.
Like, literally?
Yeah, go to the airport and do whatever they can. Here's Nick Dorward, who was the Change.org campaign babe for this campaign at the time.
So I was just about to bite into a taco when Ange called me and she just said, I hope this is not an imposition. She's always so unbelievably polite. But she just told me what was happening and she just asked me to if I could.
Just get to a airport.
Which I did. There was, information flying around in group chats in all the way over across multiple airfields. I could just see one big unmarked white plane. And I was like, that's got to be it.
Nick directs his Uber driver to the Circle headquarters, the company that helps run the detention centers in Australia.
And there was a car there, and inside that car was a man and a woman in the front seat, and that man was Aaron from the Tamil Refugee Council, and that woman was his wife.
I ran to the airport, told my wife, get to the airport, and alerted other people in the community as well.
And we said hello, got in the car, and we drove to where the plane was. And at that stage, there were already some folks, and it was this phenomenally motley crew. And we were just there by the wire fence looking out onto the airport where we could see the plane.
There's photos and videos of this online. People are less than 200 meters from the aircraft, separated by a chain link fence. They're there with candles lit and signs being held, chanting,
Stay! Let them stay! Let them stay!
It was chaotic. Yeah. I come from a war zone. When you're bombed and, you're fleeing in a panic, you're fleeing that situation, it was similar to that, we were all looking for this family, you know, just like you would be looking for your loved one in a war zone, you know?
And more people started to stream in, including journalists, like TV crews were arriving.
Whilst all this is happening, you have the family's lawyer, Karina Ford, trying to find a way to prevent this deportation. She works with the family's barrister on this because you can't obtain an injunction just because you don't want someone removed.
There has to be a legal reason behind it or a process has not been done right. That was our first step, and it really related to whether or not the process for removal had been followed correctly, and as it turns out, it hadn't been.
But this is like after business hours, right? Like, who is going to attend to something so urgently?
There are these people called duty judges who are there for urgent matters just like this.
They're on call, and that's part of their job. So, you know, because the reality is it does happen in this area.
So there's this injunction that they're rushing to put through. But meanwhile, at Tullamarine Airport, you have media and supporters gathering.
They had so much time sitting around, actually, just waiting for everything that was going to unfold.
Wait, why all this sitting around? What's with all the delays?
Nades and the kids had been put on the plane already, but I refused to leave the vehicle and board the plane for over an hour. They tried to force me off the vehicle, at which point the media, who had also gathered outside, had taken photos of them trying to drag me out. They then tried to push me back in, causing me to fall head first. They slammed the door on my leg.
Wow, so the guards are trying to keep her out of the media and Priya is avoiding boarding the plane?
Pretty much.
Because of the way they manhandled me, I was adamant that I should not leave this vehicle.
She holds off until they force her out. They grab her and carry Priya onto the plane.
Usually when we are taken onto a plane, body cams are only used until we enter it. Once inside, the body cams are turned off. Inside the plane, they can do anything to us and no one would know. They wrapped my arms around the back of the seat to subdue me and pressed my arms very tightly. They treated me like a baby chicken ready to be slaughtered. One guard thought I was too feisty. He shoved my arms into the seat with so much force that it broke my watch. The guards shoved me. They hurt me. They sought out every possible weak point on my body and used it to their advantage to force me into the seat. At this point, I fainted. As Nades was shouting and the kids were crying, I didn't know where I was for about 10 minutes. It was after this, as my child continued to cry, that I pleaded with the guards to give her to me so I could soothe her and then give her to her father. But they refused me.
Both Serco and the Department of Home Affairs deny Priya was inappropriately handled during any transport and escort tasks, or that she was not allowed to tend to her children.
Right, okay. So Priya's saying they force her to board. What next?
I just remember saying to Nades, you have to send us the details of your family in Sri Lanka, like we will make contact.
They had this as a contingency plan already.
But I do remember thinking, this is it now. And as Vashini and I heard the Serco guard say to Nades, you need to turn your phone off now, the plane is taking off soon. All of a sudden, his screen just went blank.
We were helplessly watching the plane take off.
A circle of people, they formed this circle and they just started to pray. And I started crying.
I just froze. I don't know what's happening, what to do.
Simone's daughter in the background, like she just let out this anguished sob.
We got off the phone and about 2 minutes later, I had a phone call from a different group member who said, the lawyers have got the injunction.
We managed to get in contact with a judge through the court to then grant an injunction.
And I said, it's too late. The plane's gone. And she said, no, the lawyers said that plane will come down. They'll bring the plane down at Darwin and they will take the family off.
And just as promised, the plane lands in Darwin.
When we landed in Darwin, they got us off the plane and took us to airport accommodation. My kids asked me for food. They were starving after the long journey. I only had the bottles of water that were given to me on the plane, which I gave to the kids. I told them to drink it and that we would eat in the morning.
The family get a bit of sleep in Darwin, but meanwhile,
I was just looking through my phone, seeing who do I know in Darwin. And then I remembered Aingaran.
So Aaron was like, yeah, can you please go and get this signature? And I was like, there was probably more to it that he told me, but I was like, yeah, okay. So I just went to the airport with the intention of trying to get a signature.
this is Aingaran. Now, keep in mind he doesn't know the family yet, but is Tamil himself.
It was like 2 o'clock in the morning.
So he's just out here at 2 in the morning trying to prevent this family he doesn't know from being sent back to Sri Lanka.
Yep, and someone sees Aingaran's Facebook post about this and tells him where the government usually houses people near the airport.
And so that's kind of how I ended up, wandering down that way. So there's this set of demountables at the back, and I saw a bunch of people milling around on one of the verandas. The lights are on, and I thought it was a bit unusual. Why would hotel staff necessarily be up at this time? This is probably 3, 4 o'clock by now in the morning. I think the first thing that might have tipped me off was I heard one of these people in uniform speaking to a young child, clearly a young girl, and I could hear them talking about Paw Patrol.
Ready for a rough rescue.
He confirms this is a family and just sort of waits around until morning. Just after midday, the injunction has now been extended, which confirms the family can't be deported yet. The crowd that had formed in Darwin starts to thin out.
And it was one of the press photographers came around. I think he'd been standing at the back of the donga where you could be right next to it, and said it looks like they're moving they've taken them out onto the veranda.
Serco shoved us into another room and they grabbed our phones. I told them, you can have our phones, but give me a chance to speak to our lawyer and tell our family before you take them. They said this is not possible because we were going to a government-owned area. I said, fine, whatever, keep the phones. What are they going to do, kill us? Kidnap us? So I just let them have the phone. I didn't have the energy to fight. My hands were all ripped up from the previous day's ordeals. I had dried blood clotted underneath the skin, and my body was swollen to the size of 2 people. I wasn't in the mood to fight. They had worn me down so much. I just couldn't.
The family are loaded into a vehicle, which leaves around the back entrance. Aingaran follows them in another vehicle, back to the airport just 1 kilometer up the road.
The vans had pulled up to the gate, so I just okay, well, what are we going to go out? I can't just sit here in the car. So I ran out and started filming, and then walked up to the white van, which is quite symbolic for Tamils because white vans are what government officials often use in abductions in Sri Lanka, and there's a really strong, fearful association with them. And there, the first person I saw was Nades sitting in the back seat, and he's waving to me. I was really surprised. He was kind of smiling. And then I could peer in and I could see Priya. She was leaning back, waving. And then I went back to Nades and he was talking to me, and I couldn't hear him through the window. And so I just instinctively, all I could think to say was, "We are with you. We are with you. We are with you. We'll fight for you. We'll fight for you, Nades and Priya."
We didn't know that Aingaran was Tamil or that he was trying to keep up with us because we didn't know him. We thought he was a local Aboriginal person that was taking photos of us.
The van drives onto the tarmac and away to a large military base. Aingaran loses sight of them and doesn't know what else he can do, so he goes home. Priya and Nades say that they are briefly given access to their phones and tell their friends and supporters where they are.
So we were like, it must be okay. And then we all go to sleep. We hadn't slept at all the night before, so we all go to sleep.
It feels like the storm has calmed, like they're in a military facility, they can't be deported because of the urgent injunction, and everyone is sort of dispersed and tentatively gone to rest after being awake for over 30 hours.
Which also makes it the perfect time to move the family again, without phone access, of course.
That evening, around 7 p.m, we were driven to the airport with 1 military vehicle in front and another behind us.
I asked them, where are we going? They said they didn't know.
The family are boarded onto another plane that leaves Darwin.
After about 2.5 hours of travel, an immigration officer told us that we had another 2 hours or so until we land.
Wait. Where in Australia are they taking them that's more than 4 hours away from Darwin? Even flying to Adelaide from there is only 3.5 hours.
To one of Australia's remote, external territories.
I asked where we were going, and they told us we were being taken to Christmas Island.
Isn't this back where it all started for the family? The same soil Nadees first landed on, and the same island Priya was hastily moved to when she first arrived.
Exactly, and they're moved into a facility that has been effectively closed for almost a year.
So they reopen a facility just for this family.
Yeah, Peter Dutton even says it is in the interest of the family's safety that they stay on Christmas Island.
So you'd think that if it's for their safety, their health would be taken care of.
You have been told a lie.
To stop the deportation of a Tamil family.
Let them in! Let them stay!
Protecting Australia's borders. Hypocrisy. Detained on Christmas Island.
The United Nations Convention on Refugees. This is our country.
We are a generous, open-hearted people.
A lie.
I'm Jay Uy.
I'm Tanesh, the Lenadaraja.
This is episode 4, A Private Affair. It's now the morning of the 31st of August 2019. After an all-nighter, many of the family's supporters have just awoken to the news that the family had been moved to Christmas Island overnight.
And the disbelief that they'd been sent offshore.
And I haven't thought this way too many times in the past 4 years, but just thinking, oh, this government, they're just too big. Like, they're too big and they're too powerful. Like, it doesn't matter what we do, they're always going to have something to come back with.
They got us off the plane around midnight. When we landed on Christmas Island, we were disoriented. There were no lights on at the airport. We were put into vehicles and they took us to a detention centre that had been closed 5 years earlier, the one that we were put in when we first arrived to Australia.
Wow, I'm guessing the government didn't plan on using this facility so soon. I mean, they probably thought they would successfully deport the family. I can't imagine this facility is in good nick.
It was half reminiscent of a childcare centre, but still, gates and wire fencing.
When we arrived there, it had an old smell. It had ripped bedsheets on bunk beds. It was a very small room. It is not a place for children to live.
The night we were taken there, Priya and Tharnicaa were on the lower bunk bed. Gopika and I were on the top bunk.
The bunk beds were small. We had each child sleeping on each level, and we would only be able to sit with them. We could not really sleep because of how small the bed was.
It's like going from one shitty detention centre to another, like they just can't catch a break.
Yeah, and when Angela hears about it, she immediately books a flight to visit the family.
Which is a huge journey from central Queensland. It really made me see just what lengths the government was willing to do to make this family disappear.
Remember that Christmas Island is geographically closer to Malaysia and Indonesia than mainland Australia, so it's a long trip for Angela.
Now, I'm guessing Angela had to go through a similar application process like when people visit other detention centres.
Yeah, but remember, this detention centre hadn't been in use, so...
At that point in time, you actually couldn't put Christmas Island detention facility as a place to visit. It actually wasn't on the list because it wasn't being used.
Angela brought all of her paperwork with her, but was initially denied entry.
Like, I was literally I have come all the way from central Queensland. I just want to give them a hug.
But Angela was also there with some media.
And it's definitely not a good look to stop someone from wanting to just give a hug to their friends, especially after the media frenzy around this family.
They went in and they made some calls, and then they allowed me to go in, obviously without media.
Angela and Priya see each other.
And we both just started crying.
I believed in God, but I felt God for the first time when I saw Angela's face. It's as if she had all of Bilowila's love and sorrows with her when we met on Christmas Island. Angela had travelled 21 hours, or 27 hours with waiting time accounted for, to get to Christmas Island to see us. It was a memory that I will never forget.
We just sat and held each other, and it was just, we're here. We're here. You're not alone. We're going to get through this.
She travelled so far to see us. Truthfully, it felt like we were seeing God face to face. They say you can't see God directly, but you can see God through human forms. She came to see us even when she was not in her best health. We were delighted to see her. Angela had said, "Do not worry, Nadees and Priya. You will return to Biloela. This is the one thing they would always say. Have faith, we will not let go of you. Whether it was Simone or Angela or Margot, they would always say this.
And Angela even visits a second time and brings Vashni with her.
Yeah, it was a very emotional trip, I can say, that I'm going back to Christmas Island because I was in Christmas Island before, and then they were staying in the camp where I before stayed at as well. So that's the same camp.
Wow, this Biloela community really is something special. I guess the crowdfunded campaign must be doing well.
It is, but keep in mind, Angela is self-funding all of these visits. And one thing she quickly realized was how difficult it is to get messages off the island.
I couldn't send photos back to the mainland from my phone, like it was a 2G network. And we very much are aware that that's why the family were sent there.
We FaceTimed and texted with our community in Biloela, so the public were finding out what was happening to us. To cut off our connection, they took us to Christmas Island.
But one thing about Christmas Island is that it's tiny.
Yeah, its population is less than like 2,000 people.
Which means you can't really sneak things past the locals.
The regular Virgin flights would arrive twice a week on a Tuesday or a Friday, or it would be a cargo flight bringing supplies that the community would be notified of via email. People would know when it was a border force plane, so they knew something was up.
One day there was a local school assembly that I attended.
This is Robin, a longtime Christmas Island local, but originally from WA.
And I looked over and there were new people because the whole community goes to the assembly. So I went over and introduced myself and introduced my daughters and said, please request a visit from us. We will request a visit for you.
It's like everywhere the family go, there are community members who see the cruelty and injustice of it all, and they just want to support them.
Yeah, and Robin ends up getting to visit the family, but visits would take place in an external facility, a recreational center, because she says the detention center was deemed not suitable for her children to be in.
Even though there are like literally 2 children living there.
I was told I was allowed to bring in food, so I tried to cook Sri Lankan curry, which was hilarious. It was so much like a whitewashed Sri Lankan curry. It's not funny. Came in like carrying all this food, and Priya sat there like trying to eat it, going, yes. Like we laugh about it now. She said it was the whitest curry she's ever had. And she said to me, from now on, we will cook the food. And so like every week she would cook, and it tasted a hell of a lot better than mine.
Robin ends up visiting the family almost every weekend for the next 92 weeks, with a couple of other locals also visiting.
But this was the only time they got to sit across from someone and hold their hand or get a cuddle.
And these visits gave the family some support. We asked Circle about this, and they said the family were able to leave their accommodation daily, as per their program and activity schedule, which they say the family had significant input into. But they're still stuck in detention whilst trying to give their kids a normal life.
I would play with them, and that was my life. I would pretend to be Golpika's age and play with them.
Golpika would ask, Amma, I want strawberries, I want grapes, I want this, I want that. What was I to do? It was very hard. All the other kids would have normal lives, but our 2 girls would have a very difficult one. It broke our hearts as parents. There was no joy.
They were pretty much never left alone. The department says that a Circle Guard presence is in the interest of the family's security and safety.
I remember one of my visits, I was sitting on the ground singing songs with the girls, and you just had this man sitting in a corner on a chair watching you. And for me, like I've worked in child protection, I've worked in vulnerable settings. There felt something so wrong about that, about children being watched while they're playing.
At minimum, there were 10 Serco guards in our immediate area looking after us.
The word difficult doesn't even begin to capture our experience in the following months. If we needed to do laundry, we needed to be escorted. If we needed to get clothes, we needed to be escorted. If we needed to go to school, 4 Serco guards would come with us. If we needed to go to hospital, 4 Serco guards would come with us. We felt embarrassed to be treated like criminals.
All of these guards constantly monitoring the family, and it's a facility they had to reopen for them. Like they would have had to staff a whole new location just for them. I can't imagine that would have been very cost effective.
It's not cheap at all. In fact, it cost Australian taxpayers almost $20,000 a day to keep them there, racking up a bill of almost $30 million to reopen this facility and house his family for just their first couple of months.
Wait, I'm sorry, what? $30 million for just a couple of months? $20,000 a day? That is so much money. I mean, with $30 million, you could, I don't know, buy over 15,000 iPhone 14 Pro Maxes.
Of course, that is what your mind would go to, such an Apple fanboy. But how about if you donated that money to UNICEF, you could provide a year's worth of food vouchers for breastfeeding mums in Sri Lanka for over 270,000 mums.
270,000 mums?
Yes.
Or what about you could cover the cost of a house in Billawheeler plus a family's job seeker payments for over 900 years.
900 years, holy shit.
It's just so much money. Like, why would it cost this much to keep this family detained?
Because there's money to be made, Jay.
What do you mean? More like money to be lost.
Well, one thing that Australia is a bit of a pioneer of is privatizing our detention centres.
It was really only with the election of the Howard government from 1996 onwards that the Australian government moved towards a policy of privatisation of immigration detention.
This is Dr. Sarah Dem.
I'm a lecturer at UTS in the Faculty of Law.
So what does it mean for detention centres to be privatised?
It just means that instead of governments running these centres, they have contracts with private companies essentially to do it for them.
So the nearly $20,000 a day for the Nadesalingam family is perhaps a private company saying, hey, here's how much it will cost to keep the family detained here.
Something like that.
And yeah, so a key trend I think that we see at that time is that the running of Australia's immigration detention network becomes a really lucrative and profitable activity for these big multinational corporations.
Now, the government currently has a contract with Serco to help run all of our different types of detention centres in Australia, and it's massive.
So basically for a 7 or 8 year period, the Australian government is paying just under, I guess, $4 billion to run Australia's detention network, which I think is around 10 immigration detention facilities in Australia.
What is the issue with a detention centre being run by a company that has a profit motive? What does that lead to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it leads to the company treating people in immigration detention as commodities that are part of its business activity. So even though the corporation, so in Serco's case, does have a contractual obligation to the Australian government to treat people fairly and humanely, that obligation is owed to the Australian government rather than to the people that it detains in immigration detention.
Right. So it's like the obligation to the government is there, but if you don't meet what's in your contract, it's not like the end of the world for you as a private company. But then the people who are actually detained suffer. Like their welfare may not trump all the objectives the private company has, one of which is profit.
And there have been so many human rights concerns because of this. Serco have been known to ban crayons for kids or refer to detainees literally by their ID number.
So like, who is actually responsible for the people in detention? It feels like the 3 Spider-Mans pointing at each other meme. Like, are you responsible? Are you responsible?
Ultimately, it is the government. But Serco in their contract acknowledges and agrees that it has a duty of care to detainees. The problem, though, is even in circumstances where the private company doesn't perform, like we saw in the 2012 independent review on Serco, their contract was still extended instead of it going out to tender again. Plus,
I mean, we see in the contract that the company does have a incentive to try to reduce costs, which logically results in a reduced sort of service provided, to use that term, to people in immigration detention, or reduced quality of immigration detention.
And we see this play out for the family.
If I wrote in to request clothes, they wouldn't give it to us. If I requested clothes for the kids, they would give us 2 items of clothing and say that we couldn't ask for more for another 6 months. I then thought, why bother asking them? I could ask my friends to send us clothes.
And this privatization of Australia's detention facilities also extends to those not in Australia. Baruz Buchani was held on Manus Island in Papua New Guinea for over 4 years, costing us almost $3.4 million per detainee per year. And he says disease was rampant there.
Because we were living together, hundreds men together. Also, we were living under camera for 6 years. And that is not easy, that you live in a small place under camera watch 24 hours for many years. And we were used to stay in the line to get access to small things for hours under the sun, for hours for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and in between them, we had to stay in the line for get a razor. And they didn't provide razor and these things for sometimes 2 months, 3 months.
Over $3 million a year and they can't even get a razor? That sounds so bonkers. I just don't understand where all this money is going.
There's no way they spent millions on the facility. There were 100 Serco guards working there just for us. It is the salary and food for these guards that accounts for the millions. People didn't know this before, but people now understand that you do not need to spend millions on 4 people.
And, it's because of these neoliberal economic policies that they are unabashed in their goal, which is to maximize their profits and to expand their business.
This is Maeve Higgins, a writer and journalist who writes a lot about immigration.
When you hear that, you're kind of like, okay, so that's a kind of a clean-cut, clinical, business opportunity, right? They're going to maximize their profit. But think about how that looks and feels to the person in detention, right? So the little daughters, the Nadesalingams family, they can tell you what happens. There's horrible living conditions, lack of medical care, because they're incentivized not to look after the detainees, because that way they will make more money.
And because it's privatized, it's now an industry. Let me just say it again. Keeping people in detention is an industry.
I think because by its nature, it's so sprawling. It's also because it's quite deliberately obfuscated, because it's corporations, it's investors. They're not exactly advertising what they're doing. And already I understand that I sound a bit hey, guys, it goes all the way to the top. but there's really solid research, really solid reporting on this.
JB, maybe even your super fund is investing in it.
Wait, what? Really?
You might be a tube driver in London, which is one case I came across, right? You just pay a bit of money from your paycheck, goes into your pension fund, right? BlackRock manages that. And BlackRock bankroll the GEO group, which then bankrolls the detention of children seeking asylum in Texas, right? This is a through line. So that's when it kind of stops being a conspiracy and you see, oh my goodness, it's very real.
Okay, kind of hard to believe, but also just follow the money and see where it goes and voila.
And when you get into this world of investing, you're talking billion-dollar acquisitions. In 2020, Advent International, a private equity investor, spent 4 billion British pounds to take over Cobham, who operate Australia's surveillance aircrafts.
I've never bought a £4 billion gigantic contractor, but I wouldn't do that unless I thought it was, going places.
It's not a situation of they bought them because they didn't like what they were doing and they wanted to shut them down or stop them. They bought them because they wanted to keep going.
Exactly. I mean, that's the danger, right? Because it's an industry, they are incentivized to trap and hold more people, because that's the only way they make profit.
And that's just one example, but it's safe to say that the industry is huge and growing.
The Transnational Institute, in their Financing Border Wars report, estimated that the border security market will reach a value of around $65 to $68 billion in 2025.
That's so much more money again. I can't even process how much that is.
And that it's experiencing around a sort of 7 to 8% growth at the moment. They say that it's an industry that's experiencing spectacular growth and will continue to grow into the future. And I guess that also goes to the question of why companies are so eager to become a part of it.
You should be against this detention industry because they are wasting your money. Australia has spent more than $14 billion over this policy. And what is this money? That money is in the pocket of security companies.
This isn't happening by accident. There are people making a ton of money out of this. So we need to face that and we need to decide ourselves, okay, is this what we want? Like, we want to live in kind of a fortress and we want everyone else to be in cages with walls. We want to deport children. We want to actually cause the death of families because that's what's happening, right? And that's the kind of path we're on. Or how about we look at eliminating, some of the causes of forced migration, right? How about directing some of the resources to that? So I just think reorienting where we're looking is a helpful place to start. And I think we do have, families like the Nadesalingams who help us to do just that.
Whoa, okay, this is kind of a lot. Can we just pause for a second to recap? So Australia is a leader in privatising detention centres, and the problems with this privatisation are A, there's a sort of diffused responsibility from the government. B, the private companies have a profit motive, which means cutting costs and providing services that ensure a large enough margin. And C, we have more people on the move, but we also have more players involved, now including investment funds, where maybe our own money is going to. And they want to make more and more money from this industry, which means they're implicitly incentivized to keep more people detained and for longer.
I could have not said it better.
What in the actual fuck?
Now, one area where this privatization has a huge impact on is medical care.
The immigration officers had control over the nurses and doctors, that even they deprive them to have access to medical treatment.
So it's like the detention centre staff have power over who gets access to medical care, even when doctors and nurses say medical care is required.
Yeah, and it's this private system that saw 15 doctors write a 92-page letter of concern in 2013. It talked about the shocking standard of medical care for asylum seekers on Christmas Island.
92 pages? That's a lot of concerns.
Yeah, they even said their professional integrity was put at risk. And years later, it's really unclear what's changed because the Nadesalingams also face medical issues on Christmas Island. Priya says she starts getting intense nausea and vomiting. She says she gets some injections and liquid that would help for maybe half a day, but
I wouldn't eat for 2 days. My stomach would swell up and make me look like I was 9 months pregnant. After repeatedly throwing up, they got scared and took me to the Christmas Island hospital.
Now, Ingrid, from the start of the episode, keeps in touch with the family, which is handy because he's also a doctor and works in Aboriginal health. And because Christmas Island is so tiny...
something like a CT scanner, which is essentially what she needed, that's a basic bit of equipment that you would find in most rural communities, even in Australia. But, with Christmas Island being so small, even that wasn't available.
There was a good doctor named Rosemary, and she would fight with Border Force as well as the IHMS doctor, saying, "You keep bringing her to me. Her stomach is swollen. She's throwing up. This is the 4th time. There are no further tests I can do. In my opinion, she needs to go to Perth." Then they allowed me to go to Perth.
Is this another case of the non-trained medical staff getting in the way of medical care?
They are not clinicians, they're not doctors, they're not nurses. They have the ultimate say.
And we've seen this before on Manus Island, where one detainee, Hamid Karzai, died partly because of all of the delays in getting treatment.
Those sorts of consequences could have eventuated for Priya as well,
They took me to Perth on a medical plane. It was just me that went. Nades couldn't be by my side. For 15 days, I didn't know what was happening. I just had tests. I would be under anaesthesia and have a colonoscopy, endoscopy, CT scans, everything. My body was not in good condition.
Especially if you're from a culturally and linguistically diverse background or if you're Indigenous, having a support person, a family member with you, that would have been a basic recommendation that we would have made.
Not having any support with you, I can imagine that would be quite traumatizing.
And thankfully, Priya recovered, but that's not the end of it. Now, Priya says she had further problems, this time with her teeth. But again, it's a remote island.
Specialists would only come to Christmas Island once every 3 months. As it was COVID, specialists wouldn't even come to Christmas Island, so I could only see a specialist via video conferences. But how can a dentist see someone via video conference? After having prolonged toothaches and gum pain, I finally had a root canal done. When it was time to have another follow-up appointment, it was very difficult because they were too busy, and then another 6 months would pass.
Priya has since had that tooth removed. But wait, there's more.
What? More medical issues on Christmas Island?
I know, right? This time with their youngest daughter, Tharnicaa, who gets a temperature.
At the time that Tharnicaa was unwell, we had contacted IHMS multiple times telling them that she had a fever for over 12 days. They kept saying that she is active and that she is fine. I said, you shouldn't think that she is fine just because she is active. Tharnicaa is the type of person that will only rest as a last resort. Otherwise, she will always be active. Whereas Kopika, if she has a light fever, she will immediately get tired and rest. Tharnicaa is not like that. She will only rest if it is impossible to be out and about. Don't let her activeness mislead you. I've watched her grow up and I know how she is. I know how she is at all times.
The one thing we know as clinicians that you have to take the concerns of parents very seriously. They're the ones that know their kids. They're the ones that are attuned to even the smallest change that might be, the warning sign of something really serious happening. So you always have to take parents' concerns very seriously. And Priya, this whole time, she's fighting with trying to get an IMHS doctor, even to just get the doctor to review her. Once again, Panadol, that's all they're being given.
On the 29th of May 2021, Christmas Island local Robin has her usual weekly meetup at the rec center.
And we cut it very, very short. And I went, oh my goodness, Thani does not look well. I think you need to take her home and call a doctor. And in the end, it was through Nades getting very, very upset and standing his ground with the immigration management.
After fighting and arguing to get Tharnicaa to hospital, she's finally admitted.
The doctor didn't understand why her fever was not going down. Her temperature was hovering around 40.5 to 40.6 degrees. She would vomit, her temperature was not going down, and her face was red.
When we asked Australian Border Force about this, they said sufficient appropriately qualified service providers are contracted to ensure health and welfare needs are met.
And you look at those photos of her on the hospital bed in Christmas Island, bawling her eyes out, Korpika trying to comfort her. And it's such an indictment on this country that we allowed this to happen. And, I can imagine as parents how disempowered they must have felt.
The doctor at Christmas Island Hospital determines that Tharnicaa needs to be treated at a hospital in Perth.
Her x-rays revealed that she had a chest infection and that she needed further scans to investigate what was wrong and needed to go to Perth. They refused to send both parents. I had a shoulder problem from tendon that was torn 5 millimeters, so I couldn't hold Tharnicaa. So Nades said that he would go and for me to stay. I said that my heart couldn't handle not going. I also said to Nades that he wouldn't be able to manage going to Perth on his own. Nades doesn't fight like I do. He doesn't argue. He would say, "Why are you wasting time talking to people?" He would forget dates and times due to memory loss from being in detention for 4 years. He wouldn't remember what medication our child took or what her temperature was. Otherwise, he's well-spoken and would look after the kids really well too. But when it comes to memory, he would struggle.
Priya and Tharnicaa are medically evacuated on a small air ambulance.
Tharnicaa had 2 IVs in both of her hands. As I held her, I could feel her high temperature on my face and chest. That's how high her fever was. It was very hot.
The plane lands and they're loaded onto a ground ambulance.
Tharnicaa got worse. Her eyes were rolling back, her fingertips were frozen, her face was pink, her lips were purple. It felt like life was leaving her. I took my seatbelt off and rubbed her hands, calling out to her, "Tharnicaa, Tharnicaa, look at me, look at your mother."
I'm getting chills. This totally explains why people like you and I should not determine when medical attention is required.
Once we got to the hospital, they were ready and waiting for us. The doctor took her blood and did various tests to give her antibiotics. The doctor called Nadez and explained to the both of us that she had a chest infection, blood infection, and pneumonia. Don't be scared, but you got lucky because pneumonia first affects the kidneys, and her kidneys seem to be unaffected and functional.
3-year-old Tharnicaa is this morning in a Perth hospital for specialist medical treatment.
Dizzy and vomiting, her condition only taken seriously after repeated pleas from her parents.
Now, they argue that this entire ordeal could have been avoided had she received treatment sooner.
With claims the 3-year-old was denied proper care for weeks.
Although the government insists appropriate care was provided and denies allegations of mistreatment.
Australian-born Tharnicaa will turn 4 on Saturday. Every one of her birthdays has come while in detention.
Tharnicaa's 4th birthday happened while she was in the hospital, so we celebrated her birthday over Zoom. We had ordered a cake on Christmas Island, which was cut by Kopika on behalf of Tharnicaa. Border Force also brought a small cake for Tharnicaa to cut while she was in the hospital.
Soon, Tharnicaa starts to get better.
After that, Tharnicaa would start crying every day saying, I want my dad, I want my dad, I want my sister. When are you coming? When is my sister coming? You are not coming. Why are you staying there? I'd say, it's not possible for me to come. I will try to come as soon as I can.
After the doctors had reviewed her, they said they would try to bring Nadez to Perth and that they wouldn't try to send us back to detention.
One morning, Nadez is told to pack his things. Him and Gopika are going to Perth to be with Priya and Tharnicaa.
So I took Gopika to school to say our goodbyes. I told Robin the flight details. Robin said, okay, no problem, Nadez. I will come to the airport. So Robin had come to the airport. There were many people there.
Nadez is taken to Perth Children's Hospital to reunite with his family.
The day I saw Tharnicaa, I stayed at the hospital. All 4 of us stayed in a room at the hospital.
On the 9th of June, we arrived to the hospital. On the 22nd of June, we came to the house we are in now.
It was only when we got to the house in Perth that we were given bridging visas, with Tharnicaa getting a community detention visa.
Wait, did I hear that right? Tharnicaa is on a different visa to the rest of the family?
I mean, technically she doesn't have a visa, and that's why she's in community detention.
So why isn't she given a visa though?
We don't actually know why. All we know is that her refugee status is still in flux. But this effectively means the family has to stay in Perth under Tharnicaa's community detention conditions.
Wow, that seems a bit unnecessarily cruel.
There are 23 rules that must be followed, so we as parents need to follow those rules. Under Tharnicaa's community detention rules, nobody can stay the night. We also can't stay at someone else's house. We can't travel to another state. We can't start our own business. We cannot smoke. We cannot drink alcohol. There are many rules. It's not a big change from our situation before, but it's still stressful. People think that we are out in the community and that we are free. They just can't see our suffering because it's now hidden. We can't take time away to relax or go on holiday or have someone stay with us for the night. This isn't life. They've crushed our independence. I don't think this is necessary. They could just give us a visa and let us live independently.
And she's right. The real kicker is that the immigration minister could, at any moment, give Tharnicaa the same visa and allow them all to move back to Biloela.
I mean, how can they do that? What are these special powers that they have?
So the immigration minister has this power called Wingardium Leviosa.
Oh.
No, ministerial intervention.
Oh, even cooler. Is it cooler?
It is. It's like this godlike power that allows them to basically step in and grant a visa if they deem it's in the public interest to do so. And they do this all the time. In fact, when Peter Dutton was immigration minister, he granted visas to 2 European au pairs.
Such as Peter Dutton himself quoted when he allowed au pairs into the country after representations were made to him. He spoke about the Australian interest and he used the term compassion.
Okay, but the immigration minister doesn't use his powers here, even just for a bridging visa.
Right, and when it comes to permanent visas for asylum seekers, it's not as common. Only a handful have been granted visas after their applications have been refused. So the family are stuck in Perth with the 23 rules to follow. And life goes on. Nades finds work, first as a cleaner and then at a restaurant. But Priya finds the whole situation just incredibly depressing.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yes, there is a Tamil community here. I don't want to speak ill of the community, but some feel that we are getting all this help for our case and they aren't. Others worry that if they socialise with us, they may also encounter visa issues. I don't like talking about our past again and again. So talking about all these things and reminding my kids is not something I want to do. They don't need to be reminded of our hardships. When they come of a certain age, I will tell them and make them understand. But at this moment, after having suffered for so long, repeatedly talking about it will also have an impact on how they feel. When I go to the hospital, they would ask for Tharnicaa's Medicare card. I would say that she didn't have one. They would then ask for a visa, which she also didn't have. One day, Tharnicaa asked me, "Am I not lucky?" I asked, why would she ask that? She said, "I don't have a visa or a Medicare card." I asked her who told her that. She said, "I heard you say it to the nurse auntie. You said it at the hospital. The uncle said Kopika had a visa." That is when I realised I shouldn't just speak freely thinking they are kids and won't understand. They are watching and absorbing what we are saying. We will attempt to go to some place, for example to a function or a park, not thinking about our past life or our undeserved punishment. But when we do and someone asks about our troubles, it gets very hard. So I don't go to a lot of places. I'll go shopping, I'll take the kids to play or show them around, but we go alone and come back alone. For me, once we go to Biloela, our kids will be safe. There we can take next steps. But not knowing what hardships and challenges our kids and I may experience next is what makes me sad.
So they're still stuck in limbo.
And Scott Morrison and Peter Dutton have made it clear that the Liberal National Party would not allow this family to stay in Australia.
It's not about the public mood, it's about what is the right decision in Australia's national interests to ensure that the integrity of our border protection regime is maintained.
But the Labor Party have been more sympathetic, right?
Yeah, a little bit. They promised to allow the family to return home to Biloela if they won the 2022 election.
Why won't the government let this family go home to Billa?
And this federal election is right around the corner. For the Nadesalingams, everything rides on this one day of voting.
Will the current government be re-elected, and if so, will we be pushed into danger? Our visa is expiring. What decision are they going to make? When I sleep at night, I dream about the election and immigration. What can I do? This is still stressful. I am not happy here. Our kids are also wondering when they will get to go home to Biloela. After Kopika cut her birthday cake, she said, "For Tharnicaa's next birthday, we will be in Biloela, right, Appa? Once we go to Biloela, we can all have fun together."
How did asylum seeker policies become an election platform?
Heck, how did this family become an election platform? And has their story actually changed the way people vote?
That's next time on
You Have Been Told a Lie. A lie. You have been told a lie.
Thoughts on today's episode? Let us know over at You Have Been Told a Lie on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And because Twitter's got a character limit for its handles, find us at Been Told a Lie on Twitter.
If you want to see footage of the attempted deportation, as well as the Australian government's contract with Serco, the 2012 independent review on Serco, and Maeve Higgins' report on border surveillance, you can find links to those at our website, youhavebeentold.com, where you can also find all of our references and the transcript for this episode.
We note that asylum seekers experience a lot of trauma not only before they arrive at our borders, but also living in detention. This has an impact on recollection and details.
Due to the nature of Priya and Nadesa's journey across borders, there are some aspects of their story that we will only ever know from their perspective. We have reached out to relevant parties where possible, and where comments were provided, a summary has been included.
When we reached out to Serco for a response, they made a point to mention that Serco does not employ guards, they employ detainee services officers, welfare officers, and programs and activities staff. Weirdly, SBS, The Guardian, ABC, and even the Department of Home Affairs refer to them as Serco guards. Additionally, it's hard for detainees and visitors to know the correct titles for the Serco staff, so you may have heard people in this episode refer to them as Serco guards.
This episode is written by Jay Uy and produced by Jay Uy and Tanesh Thananaraja, me.
Audio editing is by myself.
Tamil translations by me and Neerja Shammunathan.
Priya's English translation is voiced by Emma Harvey, and Nadesa's English translation is voiced by Matthew Predney, who also composed the music you're listening to right now.
The consulting producer is Rebecca Holt.
Special thanks to Priya, Nades, Kopika, Tharnicaa, the Home to Billa team, and the interviewees in this episode, Varshini Rizwan, Simone Cameron, Angela Fredericks, Nick Dorwood, Aaron Milvaganam, Karina Ford, Iyengar and Selvaratnam, Robin, Dr. Sarah Dem, Beiruz Bachani, and Maeve Higgins.
Thanks to Miles Martignoni, Jess Bennett, Cassandra Steeth, and Scott Spark for script and story advice, and MacArthur Amy for helping with research and fact-checking.
This series is possible thanks to the Jesse Cox Audio Fellowship. Thank you Kyu-Min Liu, Benjamin Law, Scott Spark, Jess Bennett, Carly Reid, Claire Holland, and the rest of the team.
There have been many people we've spoken to who have helped in so many ways, and many who have asked to remain anonymous. We see you, and we thank you for your support.
This podcast was written, edited, and produced on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We acknowledge all elders past, present, and emerging.
We also pay our respects to the traditional custodians of Gungaloo country, where Billawheeler is now situated. This land was never ceded, always was, and always will be Aboriginal land.
A lie.
On the next episode of You Have Been Told a Lie, we go to Billawheeler for the 2022 federal election.
Field trip!
Woo! Do you know about the McGuffin family from Billawheeler?
I sure do, yes.
Do you think that they should be let back here?
I absolutely think they should be let back here.
They should have been kicked out years ago.